Hello. This is my project on the philosophy and blueprint for effective teaching, my personal philosophy and that sort of thing. This project has been a great opportunity for me to reflect on everything that I've learned throughout this course, and then, of course, how that is going to connect to me being the teacher that I would like to become in the future here, or in the year that I'm moving into now. Education has been shaped by history, of course, something I'm going to talk a lot about. I love history. Laws, reform movements, changing expectations. But it's also been shaped by individual teachers, very specific people throughout history that have, made a huge impact. Maria Montessori is the one that obviously comes to mind. And then students who are in the classroom every day. Students are obviously the backbone. There would be no school without the students. My goal is to take what I've learned and create a classroom where students are challenged, supported, and genuinely excited to learn. Education has been very much shaped by history. Everything in the world is shaped by history, but education has a few key moments throughout it that I'm going to be touching on here, three specifically. These areas that have especially been influential, that I would consider are Brown v. the Board of Education, obviously, I think. No Child Left Behind, which was a huge one during my middle and high school career, and then the rise of school choice, modern aspect of the changing history here. These three topics are very different, but they all show how decisions made outside of the classroom can have a major impact on what happens inside the classroom. They've influenced my understanding of equity, which I'll talk a lot about, accountability, student opportunity, and the role of me in the classroom, of teachers in the classroom. Oliver Brown v. the Board of Education of Topeka is a necessary step toward educational equity. It was not easy. It was extremely difficult for the young people involved. It was a tumultuous time, but one of the most important moments in American history, I would say, and obviously in the history of education. When I teach Brown v. Board in my own history classes, I try not to only focus on the Supreme Court decision, but also on the students who actually had to live through the consequences of that decision. The students who first integrated schools were incredibly brave. They had to walk into schools knowing they could face harassment, threats, and hatred simply because of the color of their skin, and they did. We have photographs and historical accounts of white adults screaming at children. I always wondered, how do these people feel that they're in every textbook for, the rest of history, screaming at these little girls because they want to attend the same school as their children. These were children who were being asked to face something that no child should ever have to face, yet they persevered. They continued going to school despite the harassment and hostility around them. I believe that Brown v. Board was one of the most necessary steps in American education. It did not solve educational inequality, and we still have a lot of work to do, but it fundamentally changed what American education could and should be. And as a teacher, it reminds me that education is not separate from the larger issues of society. Schools have the power to either reinforce inequality or help create a more equitable future. Brown v. the Board of Education, again, is not just a step towards education, but it shows that getting rid of segregation is the way to move forward. I will be less generous towards No Child Left Behind. This was something that has a much more personal impact on me because I was a student during this era. Throughout much of my middle and high school education, standardized testing, specifically for me, the FCAT, it was a major part of the school experience. I remember being taught the test, basically, that famous phrase there. I remember stressing the whole year, especially, the big years, my 10th grade year, I believe it was 7th grade year, where you had to pass in order to graduate type thing. There was a ton of pressure surrounding these test scores. And I think that pressure came at the expense of creativity and expression of the teachers and of the students. We just didn't have the freedom to have as much fun. Teachers were constrained by what they had to cover. There was less room to explore topics that they enjoyed, that they found interesting, or to take a lesson in a more unexpected direction. The focus became making sure students were just prepared for the test. They wanted to make sure they passed and they got the specific scores. I understand why accountability exists. Schools should be accountable. Students deserve teachers who are doing their jobs well. Test scores are a good way to determine that. But I don't think it tells us everything about a student or a teacher. My experience with No Child Left Behind has influenced how I approach assessment today. I believe assessment's necessary, but it should be part of a much bigger picture. School choice is even more complicated for me. I really have mixed feelings about this. I understand the concept behind school choice. Uh, giving options is great. I'm pro-choice in most of my life. I understand why this is very helpful to many people. I've worked in both private and public charter schools. I've seen some of the benefits that different educational models can provide. Not every student's going to benefit from the same sort of teaching styles and school system. I think homeschooling and virtual schooling can be extremely useful in specific situations. Not every student thrives in the same environment, and having different options can be valuable. But my concern is that school choice can sometimes be weaponized or presented as a solution that's equally available to everyone when it really is not. A family might technically have a choice. They can go to, the nice fancy private school down the road, but if they couldn't afford it then, the school choice sort of discount usually isn't going to help them get into that school anyway. So it's really just helping out the people who already were at the schools and taking that money, siphoning it from, the places that really kind of need it. I worry what is going to happen to public education, the one that most of the students are going to benefit from, when the funding is redirected away from them. We have a huge portion of the population, and what's going to happen when they're not getting all they need anymore. So choice can be part of that conversation, but we also have to make sure the choices are actually equitable. Again, equity. Let's move to my philosophy of teaching. And this is developed a lot through my own experiences as a teacher, but also through my Montessori education that I received recently. I believe students are naturally curious. They're eager to learn when they feel a connection to what they're learning. I feel thankful that I'm a history teacher, because I think it's very easy to make these connections, especially today. The world is constantly sort of repeating itself. One of the most important things I can do as a teacher is to meet students where they are, to make sure that I'm not expecting more than them, and I'm not delivering less than what they need. Every student enters the classroom with different experiences. They're from different walks of life. They have different strengths, they have different challenges, and their backgrounds are different. Equity, again, coming back to that, it's important because fairness does not mean treating every student exactly the same. It means giving students what they need to be successful. I always go to the analogy of a wheelchair ramp. You would never deny a wheelchair ramp to someone that requires a wheelchair. We're not saying that they're getting any kind of an advantage here. It's just making it a level playing field. I also believe I'm here to teach the whole child. One of my Montessori philosophies I'll mention here. I'm not just a history teacher. My goal is to help students become lifelong learners. People who are creative, curious, confident, and prepared for what is going to come next. What is the purpose of education? It should be there to help students, to build a foundation of knowledge, an ability to think critically about the world around them. Students need to know things. Knowledge matters. I was having conversations recently with colleagues about this. We need to still add in some of that, rote memorization. It's good to know these basic facts about the life, or it's about the world, sorry. Students should learn how to ask questions, though. They should learn how to evaluate information, solve problems, communicate their ideas, think for themselves. Skill-based education is still very important. I want to create a fully functional, creative learner, someone who's passionate, confident, prepared for the future, but also excited about what's coming next, as I said. If I can help students leave my classroom more curious than when they entered, I think I've done something right, going to that sort of Ted Lasso idea everyone loves. The prepared environment is something you hear a lot about in Montessori philosophies. And a good teacher creates an environment where students and teachers are allowed to make mistakes and also learn from them. I always say that, in the beginning of the year, I will make a ton of mistakes. I'll fall on my face, 1,000 times in front of my students. And I try to own that early on, and I expect them to be okay with doing it too. It's one of the things I appreciate most about Montessori, is the classroom should be this sort of prepared environment. It should be organized, it should be welcoming, it should also feel alive. Though I want students to feel like they're entering a place where something interesting is always happening. Sometimes, it's going to be a completely different room when you walk into it. Setup is different, or, I also give a lot of choice of seating around the room. students get a lot of choice in assignments, time frame when they want to work on stuff. All of that goes into this sort of prepared environment. I want my classroom to be a place where students can ask questions too, without being embarrassed, where mistakes, as I mentioned, are seen as part of the learning. But also that my expectations are clear. I want to make sure that there's no confusion with what's being asked of them. I think honesty is super important. Students should know what is going on at all times, and I should be honest with them when something's not working. The goal is to create a community where everyone is expected to keep learning and getting better. Assessment or test, these are those scary words that you can really freak students out with just by mentioning them. Assessments necessary, obviously. I don't believe it should be synonymous with testing, though. Standardized testing is difficult to find time to accommodate, but it's still an important part of education. Students will encounter tests throughout their education. We don't have the FCAT anymore, but there's always a different version of that around the corner. We need to prepare them for reality. If they're going into college, they're going to be doing a lot of tests, writing a lot of papers, all of that. We should be giving them those clear expectations. But assessment should happen throughout the year and in many different ways. I want to use projects, discussions, writing examples, but also one-on-one conversations, reflections are critical for this, and quizzes and tests. All of this, to understand what students know. My assessment philosophy is that grades should reflect learning and understanding, not simply how well a student performs on one particular day. Students should also have opportunities to revise, reassess when appropriate, and learn from feedback that I will be giving them. Assessment should help me to answer the question, what does this student know and what do they need to know next? To the more dry stuff, legal and ethical responsibilities. Being a teacher comes with a lot of legal and ethical responsibility. It's something I don't know if I was quite prepared for when I started. I'm responsible for creating a safe learning environment, obviously, protecting students' privacy, following all of the school policies and of course the state laws, county laws, all of that, and treating students fairly across the board. I also have a responsibility to recognize that students do not all start from the same place. Getting into equity again. Students with IEPs, 504s, or the English language learners, other learning needs, there's so many different things that people may require different supports. Providing accommodations is not lowering expectations, it's creating equitable access to those expectations. Going back to that wheelchair ramp analogy. I also think confidentiality is extremely important, especially in this internet age. Students trust teachers with very personal information, and we have a responsibility to protect that trust. The Florida Educator Accomplished Practices remind me that teaching is a professional responsibility. I need to plan effectively. I have to create a positive learning environment. I have to be that role model that I maybe not always am in life, but I have to put on those airs when I'm in the room. I have to maintain professional conduct. And I have to continue growing throughout my career. I can't ever settle. Basically, I think being an ethical teacher means doing the right thing for students, even when it's extremely inconvenient or difficult to do it. So this is my classroom action plan. These are the 3 areas I want to focus on in my future classes. So first, I want to build a strong classroom culture. It's prepared, welcoming environment. I want it to be engaging. I want students to know what is expected of them, but they should also feel comfortable making mistakes and trying again. Then I want to meet students where they are. This means using differentiation, scaffolding, while maintaining high expectations. I want students to have multiple ways to demonstrate what they know. And finally, I want to improve my family communication. This has been a big issue for me. It's an area I know I can continue to grow in. I use Canvas at my school to organize grades, communicate information, but I want to become more consistent about communicating specifically with the families, making sure that they feel like partners in their kids' education. If I were to sum up my philosophy into just a few ideas, this would be my blueprint for teaching. I want to challenge students without setting them up to fail. I don't want to lower expectations. I want to support my students. I want to remove those unnecessary barriers, again, but while still keeping my expectations clear. I want to build relationships. I want to get to know the student behind the grade. I want to understand that every student brings a different story into my classroom. I want to make learning meaningful. I want to encourage curiosity. I want to help students become more curious about the world around them. And I want to remember that I'm still learning too. I do not expect myself to be a perfect teacher. I expect myself to be a reflective teacher, one who is willing to admit when something is not working and to make changes when necessary. So the teacher that I hope to become one day, hopefully very soon, is someone who helps students become those lifelong learners, curious, confident, creative, critical thinkers. I want my students to leave my classroom with knowledge, but I also want them to leave with curiosity. I want them to be confident enough to ask questions, even when they're, scared of being embarrassed. I want them to be creative enough to find solutions to complicated problems, and prepared enough to handle whatever comes next. Maybe it doesn't work out, maybe it's not exactly like you wanted. I know teaching will come with challenges. Education will continue to change very rapidly, seemingly. Policies will change. Students will continue to have different needs. But I want to remain flexible and continue growing. I'm not just teaching history, I'm helping students learn how to learn. It's the kind of educator I hope to become. Thank you.